In my last video, I showed you how the 17-year-old Shreyas Royal became the youngest ever British champion. And in this video, I'd like to show you how 11-year-old Bodhana Sivanandan became the youngest ever holder of the ladies' title, British ladies' title. She scored 5.5 out of 9 in this Swiss tournament and then defeated Trisha Kannimarala 1.5 in a playoff. Bodhana is already the highest rated female chess player in England. In July, at the age of 11 years and 4 months, she became the youngest girl to defeat a grandmaster rated over 2600. She beat Marc-Andrea Morizzi. And in that same month, she also became the youngest girl to achieve an international master norm, surpassing Judith Polgar's record. Now that really is something. We know how strong Yury was as a girl, and if Bodhana is already breaking her records, wow, that shows how much talent she has. In 2026, Bodhana also became a FIDE master. Well, I think she's going to surpass that before very long. And after her success in the British Championship, her live rating is now 2353. In addition to winning the ladies' title, Bodhana also won the best game prize for this game that we're about to see. Normally, when I think of Bodhana's strengths, I think of her as being an all-round player who is very strong in the middle game and very strong in the end game. You'll often see her outplaying her opponents in very long games, which I find really impressive. You know, it shows that she's not just about learned opening preparation. In fact, I think her openings are solid, but yeah, it's the middle game and end game where she's particularly strong. So she's just a good chess player, basically. She's not crammed full of opening variations. But this game isn't, in that sense, isn't very typical of her play because this is shorter and sweeter. So this is played in round 4, and her opponent is Ghasi, who's a grandmaster and very, very experienced. So this is also another impressive victory. So let's take a look at this. Bodhana Sivanandan against Ghasi. We're going to look at this game from Bodhana's viewpoint. Well, we know that she won already. So starts out as a reti and quickly goes into one of these fianchetto Grunfeld positions. So a very well-known opening variation with c4. Of course, black can take this, but Bodhana chooses just to support that pawn on d5. Very solid. Now, lots of moves possible here. You can just exchange, plonk the knight on e5, but Amit goes for a4. So that's a little bit unusual. Trying to gain space on the queen side. Also weakens that b4 square, but, well, it's not so important. Bodhana decides just to stop that pawn and get some control over b4. And Amit exchanges on d5. Carlsen once played like this and simply gave up that pawn on c4. But anyway, Amit exchanged and played queen b3. So the queen looking good on that square. And the knights came out. And Bodhana put the knight on b4. And the bishops came out to their best diagonals. And the knight came to b5 and queen b6. So after 12 moves, we have a completely symmetrical position. Now, that doesn't mean it's a boring position. It doesn't mean it's a drawing position. Because, in fact, there's so much complexity here with only a pair of pawns exchanged. And you can see there's so much interaction. So for the next couple of moves, again, some symmetry maintained. And h3 played. And after this, Bodhana decided to go her own way. This has actually been played before, but bishop c7 was played in a previous game. But h3. And this is nice. Bishop c2. And the bishop came back to e4. And it might be a bit annoying for white if that knight reaches c2. So Amit tries the same thing. Bishop c7. And instead of putting the bishop back on e5, he plays the rook to c3, which looks quite good because you can imagine after an exchange, then the pawn would recapture and the knight would have to retreat. But actually, Bodhana plays very nicely now. Bishop f5. So this bishop is working hard, but it just vacates the e4 square, ready for the knight to invade. Now, Amit should probably prevent the knight coming in with knight d2, but instead he would play bishop e5. And Bodhana now takes the initiative with knight e4. So the rook retreated to c1. Now, here is where I would like you to have your first think of the game. So how did Bodhana play in this position? So black to play. You have a think, I'll have a drink. See you after this message. Do you want to improve your chess? Get access to live masterclasses with yours truly? Then subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess, and for just $25 a month, you get a newsletter with a test game, calculation puzzles, a monthly opening survey, access to an archive with over 100 opening surveys. And you can join in live masterclasses exclusive to patrons where you can ask me questions directly over Zoom. All for only $25 per month. Do subscribe to patreon.com/PowerPlayChess and join the club. Remember, patrons, my next live broadcast, my next live masterclass will take place this Thursday, the 20th of August. I'll put details on the Patreon website very shortly. Okay, now back to the game. So what did Bodhana play next? Well, she just sidestepped with that bishop. Excellent move. Attacking the rook on c1. Now the problem is that, let's say the normal move here, e3, to block the attack, would be met by rook takes and then knight takes f2. That's the problem. So if king takes knight, then knight d3 with a beautiful fork. And otherwise, if rook takes rook, then black is taking over the open file. If, let's say, g4, pushing that bishop away, then comes back to hit the knight, and then the queen moves in. And this is already very unpleasant for white. You can see that knight is attacked by the knight and the queen. The bishop controls c1, preventing a rook coming over. Very, very strong position for black. So that's just a taste of white's problems here. So Amit decided to play bishop f4, blocking. But after this exchange, then white's king position is a little bit drafty. And at this point, Bodhana decided to switch with the queen, looking at the pawn on h3, and that's already very unpleasant for white. So for example, if king h2, just defending, then an exchange and the f2 pawn drops. Nasty. If h4, well, that leaves some very nasty holes here. So, knight f6 hits this one and bishop d3. This didn't happen, but you can see how black's queen can invade, and already that is losing. In all these variations, white's problem is that queen is way across the other side of the board in Siberia. I'm afraid it doesn't really help the defense of the king. Amit decided to exchange, and then he went king h2, but giving up the open file is perilous. Well, I think he knew that, but he just couldn't find a good move in that position. So e3, that'll expose the second rank. If queen e3, that's the move you'd like to play, switching across. But actually, there's a very nice move for black here. Knight d2. Hitting the rook, opening up the e-file, and after knight takes an exchange where you can see that black has a winning position there. All black's pieces superbly placed, and one of these pawns is going to drop. Winning position for black. So rook e1 played, but then just knight takes f2. And obviously this is very, very good for black now. Knight g5 hits the queen, queen f6. The queen swung across to e3, but it's a bit too late. Now knight e4, the knight retreats to that beautiful e4 square. If that is taken, then queen e6, and that's a very unpleasant pin. And if that's defended, if the bishop is defended, an exchange, but that rook on the second rank is just crushing. Knight d3, using the pin, exploiting the pin, and then rook takes check, and that is winning for black. Too many pawns drop. So rook c1 played, rook takes b2, an exchange on e4, so black is, let me see, Bodhana is how many pawns up? 2 pawns up. Again, if knight takes then queen e6, that pin is really nasty. Rook c5 played, knight d3, that knight now coming in, again exploiting the pin. And, well, the game finished like this. Knight takes, bishop takes, there was a check. Knight takes f4, threatening rook takes d2. And if the rook blocks on the second rank, then the queen just cruises in and it'll come in on one of these squares. So knight c3 played. Final move of the game. Knight takes e2 here. Amit resigned, because if knight takes knight, then queen f2 check, and that really is decisive. So rook takes knight is on its way. If rook c3, the queen just retreats to e6, and then rook takes e2, and it's game over. What a convincing victory for Bodhana Sivanandan. She played with a very sure hand, and as I mentioned in the introduction, I think what's impressive is that she feels her way through positions. You know, this clearly wasn't opening preparation, but you know, an experienced player like Amit Ghasi tried to outplay her in the middle game, and he got outplayed. Very, very impressive. Watch out for Bodhana in the future. So once again, my next live masterclass for patrons is coming on Thursday. If you're not a patron of the channel, then still time to sign up. And yeah, more details of that soon on the PowerPlayChess Patreon site.